Here is a pretty cool first for the channel, well, and for myself, because I am holding a sword carried during the American Revolution. Whether or not this thing was ever used in battle, I don't know, but it saw a lot of action because it was also carried during the French and Indian War, which of course was a part of the global 7 Years' War. Before I get any further, let me definitely mention I am making this video for Ryan Forrest, and thanks for his support in getting my most recent book, Deadly Ingenuity, made. Our sword was even present for one of the very first actions in the 7 Years' War, a global conflict, like we said. Not the very first, but definitely the start of the dominoes. And if all that's not enough, it has a link to General George Washington. So, originally this belonged to Captain Peter Hogg, H-O-G-G, not pictured here. This is a picture of a young George Washington. And in 1754, long before the Revolution, Hogg was made a senior captain in George Washington's new regiment. Hogg was from Edinburgh, Scotland, and came to Virginia in 1745. Anyway, our sword was present for Washington's first command, which we just talked about, which was not a successful one. In fact, it's memorialized in the song History Has Its Eyes on You, right at the very start, from the musical Hamilton, when Washington, addressing Hamilton, says, "I was younger than you are now when I was given my first command. I led my men straight into a massacre. I witnessed their deaths firsthand." This rough start to Washington's military career is known as the Battle of FortNecessity, and as you can see in the description below, this national battlefield site touches on how it was the start of the much greater conflict, like we mentioned earlier. In this engagement, Washington and his men built a paltry little fort, Fort Necessity, supposedly named by him, and ended up completely surrounded and badly beaten by the French. The English lost about a third of their forces. At the time, little could have those two loyal Brits, George Washington and Peter Hogg, have imagined that later they'd be using their arms against England itself. Firearms were of course the predominant weapon at this time, but swords were carried and used, so we're going to look at a quick montage of actual American Revolutionary swords. And this one was used by a British officer. Here's a cavalry saber. Small swords like these, meaning the exact sword type, of course, I've said this before on the channel, not just that they happen to be small swords. Anyway, they were carried and used. This batch here happens to be more of a presentation variety, as you can see. Here's one of George Washington's that he carried during the Revolution. Swords in this war and in this overall era tended to be medium to small because it's more of a secondary weapon and you're not going to be fighting an armored opponent. But beefier swords, like a Scottish basket-hilt broadsword, this specific one in fact, were used as well because, you know, if you're a Scotsman and you're fighting, you might carry that. But in general, like we said, they would be smaller and of what's generally called the hanger type. It's on your belt, it's about 2 feet long, and not long enough or heavy enough to really get in your way as you're trying to operate your musket. And now let me give you a much better view of the one I examined. Here, by the way, is the text of the letter from Washington to Hogg when he was appointed. Unlike Washington, Peter Hogg did not transition from that initial defeat to an illustrious military career. He moved on to private life in Virginia, I believe, as a lawyer, but our sword got to see action in not one but 2 world-shaking wars because it got passed on to Samuel Hogg. And he, quote, "fought in every battle the 1st Virginia Regiment was engaged in. He was wounded at the Battle of Stony Point on July 16, 1779. And that last bit is of particular interest to us for the following reason. I'm going to quote from the website battlefields.org and a page called American Battlefield Trust, the Battle of Stony Point. The Battle of Stony Point was one of the more dramatic battles in the Revolutionary War. Much of the combat was brutal hand-to-hand fighting at the point of the bayonet. While the battle itself played a minor role in the outcome of the war, it displayed to the world the prowess and bravery of American troops." And how about a blurb from Wikipedia? The Battle of Stony Point took place on July 16, 1779. In a well-planned and executed nighttime attack, a highly trained select group of George Washington's Continental Army troops, under the command of Brigadier General Mad Anthony Wayne, defeated British troops in a quick and daring assault on their outpost in Stony Point, New York. Does that mean our sword, which we're of course looking at once again here, was unsheathed in that battle, or any of the other famous battles it was present for? Well, of course we'll never know. Now let's talk about this individual sword type a bit, because I haven't gotten there yet. First, some specs. This has a 19-inch blade and is 23 inches overall, and it is classified as a Cuttoe sword. That's C-U-T-T-O-E, that being an English version of the original French name for a hunting sword. So these were kind of country swords, right? You weren't necessarily going out to battle, but it was for defense, but it could also be a tool to, hack through some brush or whatever. And again, like we talked about, they're not overly large, so you can carry it with you as you head out into the wild country. But it also became, as you can tell with this example here and some of the others we've seen, a gentleman's sword, a town sword. So what is, to me, kind of a subtype of a cutlass ended up becoming common in the American frontier because, one, you had a lot of, gentlemen moving into the New World from England, thereby became a common sidearm in this part of the world when hostilities began. It's even said that these were so common with the English colonials that Native Americans called them long knives. And so it was a feature that differentiated them from the French, Spanish, etc. And so much history to consider while holding a small, slight sword. You want to talk about the cliche, if only it could talk. I wish it could. Thanks again to Ryan Forrest, and I hope everybody enjoyed the video. Thanks.